Hello, everybody. Welcome to our wonderful webinar with the amazing Erik Ohlsen, where we're going to be talking about regeneration. I'm going to introduce Erik in just a moment. But first, I would like to say that I am speaking to you tonight from the traditional territory of the Kashaya Pomo. And I invite you, if you know it, to put in the chat the name of the indigenous people of the land that you're on right now, and just to take a moment and honor their memory and presence. I want to say this land is a land that has a history of incredible art and culture and skill. The indigenous people who have tended it elegantly for tens of thousands of years, known for their incredible artistry, especially basket making and basket weaving, baskets that were woven so tightly that they can hold water, ceremonial baskets decorated with hummingbird feathers, just really incredible levels of skill. It's also a land that suffered colonization from the Russians. It was the furthest south the Russians got on the West Coast. And later the Spanish, Californians, the Americans. But it's a land and a people of great resilience who are still here and who recently have gotten back a big chunk of land on the actual coastline itself that gives them access for the first time in many, many years to their traditional fishing and gathering grounds. So it's a very hopeful place to be. And I hope that the work we can do and this work of regeneration can put us in alignment with that indigenous work of caring for the land and caring for the people in the community. And that we can not only acknowledge the indigenous people, but commit ourselves to being part of the many very real struggles that are still going on for land and for sovereignty. We're going to start with creating a little sacred space. So I invite you to get comfortable and take a breath and just for a moment, feel your connection to the ground, whether that's your feet or whether you're sitting on your butt. Feel how gravity pulls you to earth. I like to think gravity is the earth's way of saying she loves us and holding us close. Without gravity, we'd all be flying off into space and we wouldn't be enjoying this webinar very much. So take a breath and just feel how your body is dancing with gravity. Take a breath and imagine like a tree that you could sink roots into the earth and that go all the way down through layers of soil and rock and mud, down into that heart of fire where the earth is still molten rock, liquid, hot, still hot from the earth's formation. And you can take a breath if you've had any frustrations during the day, if there's anything you want to let go of, just take a breath and just send it down into that fire and let that fire transform it back into pure energy. And then taking another breath, draw some of that energy up through all those layers of soil and rock and mud and water, up into your feet and legs, up into the base of your spine. Feel your spine stretch up and grow up like a beautiful sapling reaching up to the sky. Feel that energy move up through your heart and your arms, your hands out through the top of your head, and reach up like branches and spread out and capture whatever it is for you. The moonlight, maybe for some of you it's still sunlight. Maybe it's starlight, maybe it's rain clouds like it is here. Just take a breath and draw some of that wonderful sky energy in. Breathe it in, breathe it down, down from the top of your head, down through your heart, hands and belly, down through your legs and feet, into the earth. Feel that energy flowing up and through you and down and through you. And imagine all of our branches could touch the way sometimes a canopy closes over a forest. Even though we are far apart in physical space, let's just imagine energetically those branches touching and creating a canopy, a circle. And that under the ground, our roots could touch. I could link up with threads of mycorrhizal fungi that link the trees in the forest. And that we become one forest, one circle. And into this circle, I'd like to call the elements, which are the basis of life and of all forms of regeneration. So starting with air, taking a deep breath in and out. And as you breathe in and breathe out, just noticing what the air brings to you. How every moment, every breath regenerates the cells in our body, the life in our body, the vitality. Well, air is also connected to thought and mind. And just take a moment and think, have there been thoughts? Have there been ideas you've encountered today? Concepts that have helped you feel a sense of hope and renewal? And welcome air. And then thinking about fire, energy, passion. Is there something you have felt passionate about today? Something that excited you, enthused you, maybe even something you got mad about, angry about, angry because you care so deeply about someone, about something. Welcome fire. Thank you, fire. And water. Water is so key to all forms of regeneration. Water is life. Water is sacred. And water is connected to emotion and flows. So just take a moment and think about your day and think about maybe all the different feelings you went through today, all the different emotions. Had a watery day installing a new system for my micro hydro and getting it in just before the rain. I'm having that wonderful good feeling you only get when you do something you need to do right before the rain and do it right before the rain. So just take a breath and notice what you're feeling and say, welcome water. Thank you, water. And then earth. Earth is that quality of like manifestation, making it real, getting your hands dirty, really doing the stuff. And Erik, who we're going to be hearing from, is such a great combination of the magical, the mystical, the intuitive, and the hands-on practical. And just take a moment and think about how your day went and what you actually did today with your hands. Is there anything you manifested? Is there anything you cleaned up? Did you plant anything? Did you get your hands in the dirt? Did you take some practical steps to realize a goal or a desire? And let's say, welcome, Earth. Thank you, Earth. And finally, there's spirit, that intangible something that weaves it all together. That is so vitally important in how we connect, in the creativity and the compassion and the sense of justice that we bring to life. Just take a breath and let yourself feel what has touched your spirit today. We had a moment of deep connection. And say, welcome, Spirit. Thank you, Spirit. So here we are, and I would like to introduce Erik to you now. Erik Ohlsen grew up here in Sonoma County. When I met him, he was very young, and he was in one of our first permaculture courses, our very first one. And I remember just being so impressed with him in that course and his skills and knowledge. He'll tell you something about his life story, but already I think he must have been 19 or 20. He had started permaculture organizations. They were going around in Sebastopol, a local town, giving away gardens to people and doing garden blitzes where they'd take a block and come in and sheet mulch the whole thing in a day and plant 1 million gardens. And he rapidly progressed from being a student to being a student teacher and then a teacher with us in earth activist training. He started his own company, Permaculture Artisans, and a number of nonprofits and other organizations. In the meantime, I dragged him off to a fair number of mobilizations and demonstrations, and got him in a certain amount of trouble, but he survived that and has grown up to be an amazing designer, amazing skilled permaculture artisan, a teacher, and a social justice activist in his own unique way. And now he's written this fantastic book that tells you all of his secrets. So also, not only all of that, but he has a very deep spiritual side, and he's especially made a study of his Swedish heritage that he'll be telling you about, and has been developing some of his own very own unique earth magic. So with all of that, I'd like to introduce you to Erik Ohlsen.
Wow. Well, thank you, Star. Well, I just have to say, I'm all the better for all the trouble you dragged me into. Getting arrested 5 times and organizing seed ball workshops where the seed balls eventually got arrested by the cops. That's a fun story to tell. Maybe we'll have time later. And so thank you everyone for coming out tonight or today or this morning or whatever time it is where you are. Super appreciate you tuning in, and I want to give you a ton of inspiration and value and tangible action tonight. So one of the things to keep out for is that we will be moving from a kind of spiritual look at regeneration, especially in the winter time. And then we're also going to move into like really tangible, nitty-gritty tools to plan regenerative projects. And as I was saying to Star and Charles before we started, one of the things that we see a lot coming out of permaculture courses and a lot of the inspirational work around regeneration is folks coming out with incredible understanding of theory, very empowered, very inspired, and with whatever skills you came in with. And one factor that I have noticed is sometimes missing is some of the real tangible project planning pieces that make these projects really happen in the real world. And that's kind of why we titled this real world regeneration, because how do we go from vision and possibility into creating these paradise gardens and into restoring communities and restoring ecologies, like tangible work that is measurable, where we're sequestering carbon, we're healing broken water cycles, we're restoring native habitat, we're giving land back to indigenous folks. Like, how do we make these things happen in the real world? And that takes certain planning skills. So that's a little bit of what we're going to go into today. And like Star said, I've been doing permaculture since I was 19. So I'm 44 now. So it's been about 25 years. I've been doing regenerative design my whole life. And it's really interesting that as time goes on and I continue to develop my relationship with the land, something really interesting and unique has been happening. And some of you, it was really fun, I just have to say, to see like when everyone floods in at the beginning of one of these events and all these beautiful folks. I mean, you all are just a snapshot of the beauty of our world, and of our humanity. And so to see us all sort of like converge in this online sort of gathering is really wonderful. And I noticed some of my old friends here and some of the elders, regenerative designers here, folks with tons of experience. So thanks for coming out, and we could bring our heads together. Part of the format of tonight will be I'll give a bit of a presentation that'll stir up conversation, and then we should have about 40 minutes or so for question and answer and conversation and such. So I invite you all to bring your voices to the conversation after the presentation is over. So yeah, definitely going to keep it as tangible as possible, but also understand that part of the value of regeneration is something that isn't tangible too. It's about something that grows in our heart. It's about something that has been passed from ancestor to ancestor, and it's that basis of land-based people, and something that we all need to kind of want to call into our circle here is the ancestors, and to acknowledge that every single one of us at some point, our ancestors were place-based people and had traditions of land stewardship, and within those traditions, stories and mythologies and activities that related to season and different aspects of ecosystem that help those communities work within the constraints and resources of the community, of the ecological community. And part of what we're going to talk about today is how do we continue our journey to be place-based people again, no matter who we are or where we are. I think that real world regeneration is going to requires us to learn how to be people of place again. And so we'll talk a bit about that at the core of this real world regeneration, and then get into the real nitty gritty stuff. So with that, we will start this. And just so you all know, I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to the chat right now. I'll get through the presentation and then we'll get into conversation. If there's something that I need to know, Star or Charles, just interrupt me. So, okay, here we go. Okay, so I want to start here with the regenerative gradient. So you all just be ready to move back and forth between place-based traditional regenerative thinking into tangible action. We're just going to have to hold these two worlds as we go through. And so the place I want to start is this, because after 25 years of doing this kind of work, what you find as time goes on is that how little you know. I spent my entire adult life managing landscapes, and I know nothing. I mean, really, if I know something, then I've missed the point, because the point of engaging in ecological reciprocal relationship is to be an open participant in the unfolding of life. So I try to go into this not knowing, but we do need to create some container and parameter around how we talk about these things so that we know where we are on the map of regeneration. And one of the tools to know where we are on the map is this that I'm introducing to you. It's a fairly new concept that I'm calling the regenerative gradient 1 through 10. And one thing that I see a lot, because I've worked with thousands of clients, and I have a design company, and we've got a design department, installation crews and maintenance crews. We work with a lot of different kinds of projects, businesses, residences, schools, large farms, city governments, all that. We work with all those kinds of stakeholders. And one thing that we can't all agree on, and not everyone here would even be able to agree on, is what is regeneration? What do we mean when we say we want to do a regenerative design project? I know what I mean. You know what you mean. Do we mean the same thing? So the regenerative gradient is a great tool that we can use to communicate with project stakeholders. Let me just break down project stakeholder for a second. A project stakeholder is anybody involved with the project, any non-human persons involved with the project, whether that be spirits of the land or it be birds, mammals, plants, other wildlife. These are all stakeholders of a site, of a place, of a regenerative project. It could also be neighbors. It could be the city council of your town. It could be your partner, your kids, a school board, students at a school, your coworkers, right? So depending on what the project is, there's always a group, a community that has some kind of stake. And one of the things we always have to figure out is, well, who are the decision makers and who should we be talking to about this project? Whose feedback do we need? Okay, so we've got that set. There's a group of project stakeholders. So when we talk about a project and we talk about regeneration, the sad truth is that the vast majority of projects that might be called permaculture or ecological, and even some are called regeneration, they don't really meet what I would think of as a complete functioning ecosystem. So we kind of need to understand where we want to go, because once we're on the same page, then we can get to work. So let me just I'll give you an example. So part of this is pushing back against greenwashing. Groups or organizations or people who say, wow, look at what I did. I shifted my overhead watering to drip irrigation. Now I'm green. Now I'm regenerative, but they're still spraying chemicals, right? That happens a lot in the vineyards around here. There's a certification here called Sustainable Sonoma for the vineyards. And they literally just have to cut their water back by a little bit. And then they'll get this certificate and they'll put it outside their vineyard and they'll brand everything sustainable, sustainable, sustainable. But they're still spewing hundreds of tons of herbicides and chemicals on the watershed every year. So a 1 might be just not spraying in the regenerative scale. A 5 might be diverse organic farming, and a 10 would be a fully functioning ecosystem benefiting all of life. If you came into my garden, it probably functions closer to a 10, but here's the problem, especially in Western culture, is that our cultural aesthetic pushes us back on this scale, right? Because we've been wooed by a cultural aesthetic where we feel like everything has to be tidy and cut back and mowed back and really clean. And that is not a 10 on the regenerative gradient, right? That might be a 5, maybe a 6, 7, who knows? And this isn't to judge those kinds of projects, because we have to transition. And if that's what the client needs and they're moving somewhere on this gradient, great. They can move somewhere on the gradient, wonderful. We keep pushing. But we also need to hold up something as a truly regenerative functioning ecosystem, and aesthetics really get in the way. So I'm going to give you an example here. And the example is mowing. I was with a client a few months ago. It's a 25-acre project. I'm going to show you the design here at the end of the presentation. And they want to create a regenerative farm. I said, okay, you want to create a regenerative farm? Wonderful. Well, where do you fall on this 1 to 10 scale? Like, how regenerative do you want it? And they say, well, gosh, we want it as regenerative possible. I'm not sure. I say, okay. And they say, we're going to mow the cover crop. And I say, oh, well, how ecological do you want your mowing to be? And they're like, what? How is that? What is that even a question? How ecological do I want my mowing to be, right? So part of this is even knowing the right questions to ask, because as I know some of you know, mowing could be a devastation to an ecosystem. If you do it at the wrong time of year, you could decimate native populations, nesting bird habitat. You're breaking cycles. Like there's a variety of cycles happening in a pastoral ecosystem. And so do we want this to be a 10? If we want this to be a 10 on the regenerative scale, then we want to think about and understand what the diversity of species that are in this meadow, this 25-acre meadow, soon to be farm. What kinds are we selecting for? So we may not mow the whole thing in one go. We may actually do patches. We might protect areas and let those go to seed. We might cut back invasive annual grasses and try to suppress them to create space for other natives to come through. We might select for different kinds of flowering plants that we want to have flowering in the late winter to provide forage. So there's all kinds of ecological benefits we can get when we're managing cycles to build soil, enhance native species and habitat for wildlife. So mowing is like incredibly complex when we think about it within this level of context. So what would a 10 look like? Well, if we're really, really going purist, and again, just notice this isn't a judgment call. This is just figuring out how we're on the same page. We really want to go purist, don't use fossil fuels. So now we have basically two options. We can use a scythe, which many of our ancestors used for hundreds of years to mow, to cultivate pastoral systems. Or we can do responsible grazing. We can bring in animals in high stocking ratio and short durations of time and mimic the elk that were once in this area. This is a local project, and there was once 1,000 head elk that would move through this ecosystem, followed by wolves and mountain lions and bear, and that would be part of the ecological stewardship that nature had evolved in this space. So we could mimic that. So I wanted to give you this little regenerative gradient because it's a great tool to ask questions. And we're all going to have different ideas about what is a 10 and what's a 5, and that kind of doesn't matter. It's just about being able to have a tool to have conversations with project stakeholders, to be able to point to where we're at now and where we want to go. And so it opens up an opportunity for education. For people don't even know to ask certain questions because we live in such non-eco-literate communities and societies that people don't know how to even ask the right question. So great tool to use. Okay, now we're going to get to the core of what I think regeneration is, because we have to have the same kind of starting place. So I'm going to talk about two principles. One thing you'll find in my book is you'll find lots of permaculture principles. You'll find lots of ecological design principles. But for me, the most important ones are the ones that we find woven throughout the ancient stories that you can find in every culture on the planet. The principles of relationship that bring about an alignment on how we approach life, how we approach land, how we approach each other. And reciprocity is at the center of this. The principle of reciprocity, the concept of reciprocity, it's in our DNA. And there's a lot of different ways to bring that into our regenerative design planning. So it's ancient wisdom found in every place-based culture, which again, every one of our ancestral lineages will have this. It's as relevant today as at any time in human history, especially because culture does not teach us how to be in reciprocal relationship with ecosystem, let alone each other. And it's our remembering that we're nature. We're not just participating in this. We are fully a part. We're a link in the web of life when we understand the process of reciprocity. And I'm going to stop my share here for a moment because I want to give you a couple magical tools now, because it's December 1st here. We're moving into midwinter, and in the northern hemisphere, at least. And this is a wonderful moment to engage in a spiritual type of reciprocity, especially as many of us move into different traditional celebrations, right? Celebrating the land, celebrating the return of the sun, celebrating the dark time, celebrating coming together. We have Hanukkah coming up, we have Yule or Christmas, we have Kwanzaa, we have a whole set of traditional celebrations that are happening at this time of year. And why is that, right? Why is it that in the darkest time, again, in the north, that we need to come together to celebrate life and each other? And that is because we're literally talking about survival, and every place-based ancient culture would be fully woven into the concept and conversation of survival. So I want to share with you a couple traditional methods of reciprocity from my ancestral lineage, which is a Nordic Scandinavian lineage, which is a very place-based ancient wisdom that's born out of that place. And so let me share this first one with you. This bread, okay, I just made this today. It's called a sokaka or sokaka brode. It's a seed bread. And so what you do is it's a very dense, you can see it's round. Here I put a bit of a solar cross in here. It represents the cycle. And part of what we do in our tradition is we bring the spirits of the land inside, because it's so dangerous outside in the far north. It's so cold. So you bring them to the table. You invite them to the table so we can all feast together and be in community together. Give a protective space. So this has local grain from this area in the bread. There's also 3 kinds of seeds that are in here: plantain seed, a wheat that I grew, and elderberry. These are just ones that I have a relationship with, that I have grown right here on this land, and so I put them in here. If you were to do this for yourself, you would find the ones that are most appropriate for you in your space, in your community. So it's a seed bread. You do not eat this bread. This isn't for human consumption. You place this bread on your dining table, and you stack all the breads you're going to eat throughout the winter, are laid on top of it. And you celebrate around this bread. You have your feasts and your community, and you sing your songs and you enjoy together. And when Yule is over, which is about January 13th, or maybe around the first new moon after solstice, this bread gets put into the seed vault. So it rests where you store your seeds, your spring sowing seeds. It rests there until spring. And when springtime comes, you pull this bread out, which is now absorbed all of that community and all of that love and all that celebration that you held through the winter. You survived another winter. Wow, we survived another winter. And this holds all of that. And so when you sow your spring seeds, you rip this bread apart and you sow it with your seeds. And you return it to the land. So that's the sokaka bread. When we talk about reciprocity, this is the kind of traditional way that we can align our hearts, our minds, our spirit, our community, where we can be in reciprocal relationship with the spirits of the land in such a way that's very, very tangible. So I want to share one more with you, and then we'll get back to the presentation. Okay, so this is a small representation of what we would call a Yule stone. And so folks still do this in Scandinavia, and they've been doing it for probably over 1,000 years. So this is a small representation. So what you would do is this is just a small little willow stick. But the way that I normally do it is I would take a big staff, like a 6 foot, 2 to 3 inch diameter staff, what we would call a stone. And on top, you tie together offerings. Offerings for the spirits of the land, offerings for the birds, offerings for all of the life. This is some sorghum that was growing in my place, but we might do wheat, we might do corn, we might do any kind of seed, really a seed-based thing. And you could go big, this could be a huge bunch. And you raise this as an offering. It's an offering. It's a gift to the life. It's a gift to the spirits of the land. And traditionally, you'd make a solar cross, kind of like this, and you would attach these. You'd attach your offerings to these in a spoke, and then you'd raise this on a huge staff, and it would be an offering to the birds and to the spirits of the land. And often, this is the final harvest. The last harvest is always given back. You never harvest the last of anything in my tradition. You never harvest the last of anything. That's always for the spirits of the land, for the land organisms in the community. So these are just a couple, very easy, very deep, very old ways that we can engage in a spiritual type regeneration, a way that we align ourselves with landscape, with ourselves, with our community in a way where we really honor life. Okay. And now back to the heady stuff. So one thing that you'll notice, especially with the Yule stone, is that we are also thinking about the yields of the ecosystem. And this is the other principle that I want to talk about here before we get into the nitty-gritty stuff, is that we're talking about the needs of ecosystems. And so, say with the Yule stone, we're providing seed and forage for birds and wildlife to feed on. So it's a literal, tangible food. It's forage for the community. And when we're designing our regenerative landscapes, gardens, farms, our projects, what are the ecological yields, right? We spend a lot of time talking about human yields, and incidentally, human yields are ecological yields since we are nature. But it's helpful to also frame ecological yields as developing systems that benefit all of life. So can we sequester carbon? Can we clean water and heal the broken water system? Can we enhance habitat, create ecosystems of biodiversity and abundance? Can we build living soil? Can we develop a abundance for all living things to the max degree that we can do that, and develop totally biodiverse, fully functioning ecosystems? And incidentally, when we do that, we create adaptation to climate crisis, to drought, flood, and we do it in a fire smart way. So between these two very core principles of regeneration that you find in all place-based people, reciprocity and working for the benefit of the other, for the benefit of the ecosystem, we have a very strong taproot to move into how we engage projects. So now just take a breath for a second. We had a little spiritual moment there, and now I want you to put on your thinking caps, because now we want to get into, well, how do we make this happen in this complex world, this world that is run by a money system currently, that is, many of us are inheriting landscape that is completely devoid of life, destroyed. I've turned parking lots into ecological paradise, right? We've removed harmful chemical-oriented agriculture systems and transformed that into regenerative ecosystems. This is the work we get to play in, but there's a lot of important factors that we have to engage in the mundane in order to make these happen. So here we go. I'm going to share with you a professional design workflow. This is something that I've developed over about 25 years. You'll find it in my book, and it's let's go. So now we're in the infograph land. So I do want to go through this with you because there are some aspects in this infographic and in this process that I think a lot of ecological designers skip to their detriment. And when I say to their detriment, it's because I've seen so many projects fail. I've seen projects get bulldozed. I've seen projects get hung up for 10 years without ever coming into reality in the world. I've seen communities split apart through through trying to come together around a regenerative project. I've seen marriages split apart. There's a lot of, when we get into the process of working together to plan a regenerative project, a lot of things can happen because money is involved. People make decisions. They're not always on the same page. And so how we communicate, the process of communication and all are super important. So let me go fully into it. All right. So over here we have the first site visit. There's two things I like to do when I initially come onto a site. The very first thing is that observation piece. I know there's a lot of you permaculture folks here and you know about observation, taking time to do site assessment. But one thing that you might not realize, even especially for you more experienced folks, how often do you drop designer mind? We walk onto landscapes and ecosystems that we know, and because we have experience or knowledge or whatnot, we immediately go into design, which is imposing a concept onto the land, right? If you're in design mind, how are you listening? How are you learning the story of a place? How are you able to see the anthill that is filled with mycelium on the south-facing slope in the middle of summer? You'll probably walk right over it if you're in design mind. So the first thing that you want to do when you walk into a site is drop the designer's mind completely and be in childlike wonder, right? Just be in a place of curiosity. Even if you've been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, still do it this way, because this is going to help you attune to the nuances of a site, and the story of that place, and that you are coming in humble. You don't know. So that's what I try to do. I have 25 years of doing this, and that's finally I've learned this. Finally, I learned this. I mean, 15 years ago, it's like I'd walk onto a site. Within 5 minutes, I've got that whole thing swaled in my mind. Even if swales aren't even appropriate, I've already swaled that thing in my mind, because that's my tool. That was my go-to. And let's get the machine out here, and we'll get this shit done. And that can be detrimental to existing ecosystem functions. And so if you really want to be a participant in the unfolding of an ecosystem, then you want to come in through a humble relationship, a reciprocal relationship to start. Then you can start to find what are the leverage points where a change here, a change there will create even more abundance. So I take that time to listen. And the other part is, when we're figuring out the context of the project. So yes, we're taking time to listen, observe ecosystems and climate and the movement of energy through the site and all topography, orientation. I think most of you probably know, these kinds of factors that we look at. But then we also have to look at our personal context in the project. How much time do you have for this project? Or if you're getting paid, how much do you need to get paid? How much time will it take to be there? If you're engaging with project stakeholders, what is their context? What do they need? Where are they on the regenerative scale 1 to 10? Where does this project fall on that scale? You're in a space of asking a lot of questions. And as soon as possible in a project, as soon as possible, it'd be really good to get into the values and goals of the project stakeholders. Are you even on the same page with this? Excuse me. So out of this, developing the context, you've got your full site assessment, you've got figuring out the values and goals of the project and all the project stakeholders. And then as soon as possible, what's the budget? And again, this is what dooms most projects is there's not a conversation about a budget. And so then people feel sort of trapped in this conversation about money and a conversation about what it'll cost, maybe not realizing always that even if it's a small budget, things can get done over a period of time, over a period of seasons and cycles and years and generations. So it doesn't matter how quick, fast, or slow it happens. If you're on that path, then you're on that path. And so budget is important so that you get on the same page at the beginning, but it's definitely not something that will keep a project from happening if you're willing to work slow and you're willing to connect with relationship in mind. And part of the way you do that is you develop a phased design plan. One of the issues we get into a lot in my company, Permaculture Artisans, and it's been coming up for 20 years, is when I work with the client and say, I would always like to design for 7 generations. So somebody hires me to do a design. It's like, I want to design for the maximum biodiversity and ecological yields and regenerative processes and systems for all of life. And yeah, maybe it's a totally destroyed, clear-cut 150 acres with no water, and it's going to take, $1 million to achieve that or whatever. I've got to know what the other stakeholders' needs are, right? Like, what kind of design are they wanting? Do they want a design that fits a budget? Oh, I only got $10,000 to work on a project. I only got $1,000 to work on a project. Do you want me to design you something that is $1,000 project? Or do you want me to design you the 7-generation project and you can take your whole life to create it? These are questions we need to have with stakeholders, because if you don't get aligned on that, then the project can fail. And again, I've just seen it so many times. That's why I make such an important point of it here. So that's all at the beginning before you even design. Those are the kinds of conversations that you want to have in your process. So that way you can move forward with solid agreements and a strong understanding of how you're going to do this. And so then from there, you would want a base map. Obviously, I think most of us probably know you want some kind of map of existing conditions so you can start to develop concept plans. And then you have your first concept plan. Now, again, this is a part that can often go missing when we're working on, again, even if it's just you and your partner, it's just your backyard. And you're usually the first idea isn't necessarily what's going to be the thing that you build. It's a process, right? So you want to have a first idea, the first concept, and then you go into the first project stakeholder feedback. So say in my company, we would do initial design knowing that it's going to be not going to be permanent or final. So you don't put all the final touches on your first concept. You bring it to the project stakeholders, in this case, maybe a client, and they say, oh, that looks great. Oh, I'm concerned about that. Oh, I really don't like that. And you go into a revision phase. So then you go into your first revision phase. And at that point, you're incorporating stakeholder feedback now into the design process. Super, super important. When you go back to those project stakeholders, again, whether it's clients, it's your partner, it's your neighbor, it's a school board, whatever it is, when you go back after you've had a feedback session, you better have represented in your plan some of the feedback that they've provided, if these are important voices in the project, that their voices found their way in, or if not, that you have a compelling reason why, because maybe you're a professional, why this or that won't work. So you go back to them. And so this second opportunity to provide a plan should have the feedback incorporated into it. So now you're moving closer to something you could build, closer to something project stakeholders are going to be totally on board with. One thing that can happen is that because we are all have different learning styles, is that sometimes folks can't really see what it is on the map, and you run into paralysis analysis stuff. And at that point, you might actually go out to the site and physically lay things out on the ground itself. That can work wonders to bring stakeholders together, is just stake it out. Like, here's where the path is going to go, and there's going to be a rain garden here, and you stake that out or flag it out, and you start to get some ground truthing, and that could speed the process up a lot. I'm going to speed my process up a lot because I want to get to questions and a couple more things. So once you've had your next your second sharing with the project stakeholders of the design concept, there's going to be more feedback. Usually that second time it's not perfect, but you're much closer. And so, of course, you're going to receive that feedback and you're going to do one more revision. Now, by the third time that you revise, if you've done the work right and you've really listened and you've really had a good process with all the stakeholders of the project, that third design plan should be golden. Like it, with maybe a couple minor tweaks here and there, but this project stakeholders, they should basically know what they're going to get on that third one, because you've already had 2 whole feedback sessions, unless something totally changed for you, and that can happen too. But I'd say 90% of the time, that third revision should be the last one. And once you're there and you get the go-ahead from the team, project stakeholders, now you develop the final plan. Now you can start developing the phased installation plan. Because again, not everybody has the resources to build something right off the bat. So is this going to take 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 25 years? Doesn't really matter. It's whatever is the good fit for that community. But at that point, you can revise the budget. You can coordinate labor and materials. You can figure out how to actually achieve this now and how long it's going to take. You phase it out. You lay the project out on the site, and you build the landscape. And there's more on here, but I don't want to spend too much time because I know we're getting into the nitty gritty. But if this general process again has been honed through over 20 years of doing this work professionally, and this will get a project happening. Like when this process will achieve wonderful things in the world when you have a good process of communication. Okay. So,
Eric,
yes.
one question in the chat is, how much time are we talking about for this process? Would this normally take days or weeks or months or decades?
At minimum, weeks. And we usually say around 6 weeks is probably about the minimum turnaround time for this process. It all depends on the scale of the project, the scope of the project. But again, scale and scope are varying factors too. I mean, you could spend the same amount of time on a 100-acre design as you could on a half-acre design. I know it sounds crazy, but absolutely could be the same exact amount of time in both ways to get to this phase of a concept plan that you can move forward with. So I would say a minimum 6 to 8 weeks, but if we're really, again, we want to be a 10 on the regenerative scale, then probably 4 seasons of this process. It all depends on the time it takes has everything to do with the context of the project stakeholders, everything to do with context. I have projects right now that we thought we would be done within a year, but now it's with county permit and planning, and there's architects involved, and years just like kind of disappear on some of the bigger, more notable projects. So it depends, but you could do it in 6 weeks if you had a hyper intense turnaround there. Okay, one more just little tool. I won't spend a lot of time talking about this. This is called a Gantt chart. Again, you can find this in the book. I have a whole discussion about it there. And this is just a tool to help you plan the project. Like you have the date up at the top there, the dates, weeks, and months. And so this is another great tool to use for yourself to plan your time, your materials, the team you're working with, the money, the budget can be planned out this way, but it's also a great tool to share with project stakeholders, because then we can say, well, it's going to take, I don't know, 4 weeks for the full project site analysis on this particular project because the context calls for that. And then we're going to get into building, in 2 months is what we think. So again, this will be all context-based, project-based. So it'll look totally different for every project, but it's very, very helpful tool. What's nice about this is it shows you that things overlap, like right here, we're still doing project analysis. We're starting design. We're always doing context understanding, and we're doing concept planning. Like these things are all kind of happening at the same time. So it helps that, there's multiple variables that we're working with. Great tool. You can find these online, super easy, and there's like some plug and play apps for that. Okay, we're going to get to questions here in just a moment. I'm going to just spend 5 minutes on reviewing a couple of designs with you, because I think it helps illustrate some of this. So earlier I was talking about the 25-acre project where I had the conversation with the owner about the mowing. What level of mowing do you want? You're just going to mow 25 acres, or do you want to think about habitat and cycles and different plant species and things like that? This is that site. And this is a really cool site because this is an agri-hood system. So this is a 25-acre regenerative farm. It's in the middle of what's going to be about 150 units that are going to get built around this, homes. It's a development called Somo Village over here in Sonoma County. And so really cool concept. They want to, they're developing, but they want to create a neighborhood farm to really bring up a living experience, a valuable place to live, where you have a farm where you can get your food, you can be joining CSA, you can come here to the gathering areas in the barn, and you can have weddings and quinceañeras and bake pizzas together, and it's a central gathering place for this future community. So 25 acres, and this is probably the second iteration. It's the first or second iteration of the design plan. So it's not by any means a complete final design. It's not going to look like this in the end, but this has been a tool now that the clients have used to host multiple design charrettes in the community to be able to get more feedback. And one of some interesting things to note here is this water coming in through here. There's about 100 homes whose runoff is being directed into this slightly off contour swale system. So we're taking the runoff off of a pretty big neighborhood, planting it into the ground. And we've talked about having a corridor park in the middle of the boulevard that is a dry creek system where water infiltration and edibles and medicinals, and you can walk your strollers there. There's a trail all the way around this project. So this is a public walking paths, again, for joggers, bike riders, walk your family, walk your baby around. So creating a place for community to be in deep relationship. And then, of course, the part of the story of this place is that it's a wetland ecosystem. So we've got water that is pooling in areas. And of course, good ecological design is we're going to work with and enhance places where water gathers rather than drain it away. So we've put these ephemeral pools and native basketry gardens in here, and honoring where water wants to go. So we could talk more about that later. Last one I'll share here with you is the Sebastopol City Hall Library, just to give you a sense of how creative you can be with the design process. That here we have this here is the Sebastopol City Hall. This is the Sebastopol Library. Spent 2 years in a community design process to come up with this plan with city council members and planning department and volunteers. And what we've created is a cultural history garden, a narrative through time. So this particular design, it's a public food forest in our community here. So one of a number of public edible food forests that we've helped create in Sonoma County. And the first section is a section dedicated to native pomo and miwok plants that hold the medicinal edible value, basketry value for those peoples. The second one is sort of a pioneer immigrant era garden that represents there's a lot of diverse peoples that came through here when they built the railroads, and it was a very agrarian community, still is a very agrarian community with apples and cherries and grapes, so represented there. And then we also live where Luther Burbank, who's a world-renowned plant geneticist, he had his experimental gardens just a couple blocks from this site. So there's a Luther Burbank garden. And then the fourth section is kind of a permaculture system, the way that we design things now. So this has been designed, funded, built, and maintained. It exists in the community right now. It's a public, people can engage in this and enjoy that. So I just wanted to share a couple of these potentials of how creative you can get, the kinds of things we can accomplish together when we have a good design process and working with these different project stakeholders. And then finally, just, if you haven't checked out my book, like, it's 500 pages of very tangible information. Like Starhawk said, I mean, I've just kind of like put all my secrets in there, and the kinds of things I've talked about here, you would find in there, and then also very expanded. If you have the book and you want to leave a review or a rating, like, that really helps. Like, getting books out in the world is a crazy hard thing to do. So any support in that, I appreciate. And then it is a curriculum. This book is a full curriculum. So if you know permaculture programs or landscape design programs, community colleges that might want this kind of resource, let me know. And with that, I'm going to stop the fire hose of information. Thanks for all of you who are survived that. And let's talk.
Thank you, Erik. Maybe we can all unmute for a second and just give him a round of applause. Awesome.
Hey.
It's too much. It's too much. It's too much. I'm not good with praise.
Erik, I am so proud of you. It's L'Oreal Golden Hawk Star. I added the hawk. I know exactly why you did, but Erik, I met you. I don't know if you recognize me or not, but it was several years ago. It was like 10 years ago. I couldn't believe it. Is he just drawing that? Is that an example? That's the land that I was at 10 years ago. I can't believe it. I can't wait to visit it again. I still live in Sebastopol. I see your trucks all around. I have gone up to one of your landscapers. My friend lives at Colonial Manor, and I noticed no one was using a leaf blower, which is 20 decibels above the legal limit. As a recording artist, producer, and massage therapist, and political revolutionary, just like you, Star, I went and asked the city, what is the legal limit? Okay, and then I see your landscaper. Could I please have your permaculture artisans? We don't use leaf blowers. We don't burn foam. Oh my God! And that's one block from where I live. So it is such a thrilling time. And I just need to tell you this, and I'll get right off. Even though it's Shabbat, Star, I'm still going to do business. Timeless Sound is the name, and your books, your movies, I have movie connections. It's really true. I was born and raised in the Big Orange, LA, the land of entertainment. My dad's last company, he's a philanthropist. I have philanthropy genes. I have several $100.
Okay.
I mean, several $100,000 to put into distributing your book and finishing the movie. I just bought it again, The Fifth Sacred Thing. It has to be a movie. I knew that when I first read it, when it first came out. So this is I am so thrilled. Plus, I'm moving to a home in Occidental, a large, beautiful home. And we need you to be part of it. And you, Star, it's going to be very soon, like January. We can attract a lot of, I'm a musician, so I can really attract.
L'Oreal, maybe you can put in the chat, you can send it privately to me and Erik. Send your contact information and we will, whoops.
Great. So thank you for that. Other questions, comments? One thing is, I don't know if there's a raising hand thing here. Maybe folks could raise hands.
Yes, there is. There's a little raise hand thing. And if you use the raise hand thing, you'll pop up on the screen. We'll see you. Right.
Yeah, so if you have a question or a comment, why don't you do that, and then the moderators can pick, and we can go, and then keeping it. We've got about 20 minutes or so left, so keeping it crisp and brief and stoked to.
I see a question in the chat, Eric. Do you hand draw your designs, or do you use a specific design software?
Well, we mostly use AutoCAD, which is kind of one of the premier computer softwares, but sometimes we do a rough draft by hand. I don't personally do it. We actually have Taylor, are you still here? We have Taylor Ohlsen, who's one of my designers with my company. She actually was the one who did that graphic of the 25-acre site. She's here with us tonight. Maybe she can answer some in the chat there as well, Taylor, if you're still with us.
Sure.
Okay.
Hey, there you are. Hi, Taylor.
Hi. Hi.
So what do we use for design planning, for drafting?
Yeah, no. Yeah, you're right. We use AutoCAD primarily. Sometimes we use SketchUp if we need to show something in 3D. That's not quite as common. It takes a little longer, but AutoCAD's a really good tool for that. And sometimes we do, like the plan he was showing is rendered with Photoshop just to show some of those textures and things like that.
So I see Lee Adams has raised her hand. And then, if you are named Mariah Master, but you're not actually Mariah Master, go ahead and rename yourself. So I don't know quite why that happened, but.
Hey, I just wanted to tell you that I received the book.
Received
the book, and it is excellent. It is really, really good. I haven't had a chance to go all the way through because I've been in the gardens, but it is wonderful. Thank you for it. And thank you, Starhawk, for supporting this and helping bring it to all of us. But Erik, outstanding.
Well, that means a lot coming from you, because you're a master in your own right in this work. So thank you so much for that.
And I see another hand raised by one of the many Mariah Masters.
My name is Janaki, and I can't change it because I'm on an iPad. I haven't figured out how to do that. Sorry.
Anyone else, please write your name in if you can, so we can all meet. Thank you.
I have a question about finding out about budgets, because I find with private clients that I'm working with, smaller properties, when I ask them what budget they have, it's a very touchy subject. It's something that nobody wants to talk about. They don't want to. It's almost like there's a fear that whatever number that they're going to give me, I'll just spend it, where I'm actually very frugal. But I don't know how to bring up that topic and have it work. If you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's a really important question and a scenario that is challenging. And it's always going to be challenging depending on who you're talking to. Those are hard. And so we always ask at the beginning in our initial sort of intake form what a client's budget is. And sometimes they say, well, I don't have one, or I don't want to share. And then we honor that. So, okay. What I would say in those situations is the next way to engage them is, no problem if you don't know what your budget is just yet, or if you don't want to share it, totally understand. But how would you like me to approach the design? Do you want me to approach the design in a way where we achieve everything possible here? Or do you have a particular approach to investing in the land that I can match with that? Because I think because you're providing a service, and that's a very reasonable question to ask. What kind of service do you want me to provide for you? Because this is something that comes up, constantly for us, where if we don't know, then we design a project that'll cost $50,000 and they only have $5,000, and then they feel like betrayed because you designed something, you went over their budget. So maybe from that approach, and then if I was still in that situation, my first design plan would be a very rough concept, just to test the waters. That's how I would start with my first one. Would be very rough, not too much detail, And then depending on what they like, you can start to tease budget out again and say, oh, okay, so you want a path here. Well, if you did it in flagstone, that could be, 5,000, or if you did it in wood chips, it might be a few hundred. And then you can start to engage it in little bits. I don't know if that's helpful.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. This is very practical. I'm really grateful for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Erik, I see another question. I wonder if Erik could speak to the challenges or tips to get people involved in permaculture projects. I've been building a project for years, and getting folks inspired and committed seems to be the hardest part.
Yeah. Well, let's talk for a moment about the difference between, and I don't know the context of your project or community or place, so forgive me if I'm not holding certain nuances that you hold, but I think that we have to have a little conversation between volunteering and paid work. And because I think this is an edge that is a tricky edge, because the way I started out, I volunteered 40, 60 hours a week for at least 5 years is the way I started. I mean, that was just because I was wrapped up in my identity of being of service to the world. And I really didn't care much about myself as much as who I was as an activist. And that was my whole identity was wrapped up in that. And so I would feel so good to go and volunteer. And also for someone like me who never went to college, really great way to learn skills is to just go volunteer and be on projects and help people and learn from people and be mentored by people and get experience. But the economy is really tough right now. So and the younger generations, and I don't want this to be a blanket statement, but I don't see, at least in my community, the same kind of volunteer spirit that we had 20 years ago. And I think that's probably a product of the challenging economy that we're in. And so it's not that people don't want to, it's just like, I can't, I'm like sunk in loans and debt and bills and things like that. So it's the reality of the situation. So again, I don't know.
I've seen that is true kind of across the board in many different contexts. Again, it's not even that people don't want to, but I think younger people, especially, like, just living and surviving is so challenging that it doesn't leave them the time that we kind of had when I was young to say, oh, well, you can work a part-time job and spend half your time, the rest of your time being an activist or an artist or a gardener, whatever.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm really motivated. One motivation I have is, how do we build an economy out of this work? So sorry for the long-winded answer to your relevant question. But pay people, that's the first kind of answer is can people find a livelihood doing this and see themselves on a path to their own abundance and survival through doing this kind of work. And honestly, if we're talking about scaling and healing the planet, on global scale, then it has to be an economic way approach, because people literally just are in survival mode. So that's one piece. But the other one is, creating celebration. So, put the paid part aside, creating celebration. I found that to be a wonderful way to get people involved in projects. So you have food and music and a fire, and it's it's a garden party, it's a work party, and it's a celebration. And that can be a great way to motivate people to come together and share in a community experience, building and growing. And it would be project based. These aren't necessarily consistent folks who are going to show up for months on end, but you want to get a lot of work done in a short period of time, and you get the materials there and you have it planned out, and then you throw a big fun party and you spend 3 or 4 hours working together, and people come in and out of that work. And that's a beautiful way to build community, share knowledge, and get a lot of work done.
See other questions. I'm thinking I have a wonderful friend who's an amazing organizer in El Salvador. Her name is Marta Benavides, and also a permaculturalist. And I just remember when we were down there one time on a visit with a group, and we had an organized work day to get together with some different groups. Uh, and this was the most amazing day. We went to this place where we were going to be rebuilding this old school and turning it into a community center. But first, we had to have breakfast. And then we had to have like a little ceremony where people got awards and certificates. And then we all had to dance the Macarena. And then we did some work. And then we had lunch. And then we all went to the beach. And then we had a spiral dance. And it was a wonderful day. And we got a lot of work done. But it really made me realize, oh, right. I'm always like the workaholic, get everything done. We got to get on it. And realizing, oh, like the point was to get the work done, but more the point was to build the community. And the giving the awards is important, for people. And, in some cultures, especially in places where people often don't get a lot of rewards or a lot of acknowledgement, that little piece of paper might not mean that much to you, but it might mean a lot to somebody else. And that public acknowledgement can be really, really important. And then all of those wonderful things that we did together helped create that sense of, yes, this is a community, and create the energy for the ongoing work of continuing to rebuild that.
And I think one of the ways that you do this, Star, which is really powerful, is to bring that ritual element in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another great way to draw people into the work. And especially now, I don't know how many, I don't see everybody here and with the age group and generation and all that kind of stuff, but I could tell you in the last few years, I've been diving into old folk magic of Northern Europe, and there's whole massive communities. Like, people are being so turned on, young people are being so turned on to wanting to rediscover where their ancestors came from and how they lived, and to be able to understand tradition, especially for those of us in the United States, where tradition really, for many of us, wasn't passed. We were given, white supremacist capitalist culture as like the thing that we could bite into, rather than some old land-based way of being. So there's tens of thousands of young folks that are being turned on by witchcraft and folk tradition and magic. And, and as we know, Star, these things come from the earth. They come from our heart, they come from the earth. And so earth activist training and magical activism and all of this work is another great way to bring people into the land, as one road back to the land, and bring people together that way.
Well, people have a very powerful drive to feel a sense of belonging and being part of something bigger than yourself. And I think we see so many ways in which that longing is used in a very negative way of saying, well, yes, you can belong by saying this other group doesn't belong, and we're really suffering from that right now as a country and as a species. But I think when we do ritual together, we do celebrations together, we create those positive kinds of things. That's a very positive way of creating that sense of belonging and giving people that sense of connection. And I think that's really vital for our social permaculture, which is one of the aspects like we like to teach in earth activist training, along with some of the practical stuff and the design stuff and all of that. But weaving it together with also how we create those social bonds and those social connections.
Yeah, and something that you said about your story of where was it, El Salvador that you were?
Yeah.
And there was I was almost like the social container for the work was almost more important than the work. It's
Yeah.
like, how do we celebrate together? How do we celebrate each other? And the act of eating, and that's why I said have a party and have food. I mean, the act of eating, that is the pinnacle of relationship to the land, because all the food came from the land. That is the
That's why we call it Earth Activist Training, because the initial
Eat.
spell, eat. And we do. In our in-person courses, I have to say, we eat very well. And we have one coming up in January, 6th through the 20th. And as part of it, it'll be a permaculture design course, full certificate course. And as part of it, we will get to go visit Eric's place and see some of his projects. So if you're interested, I think Charles can put in the chat the link to our, we do a lot of online programs. We have an advanced program in regenerative land management, and that's partly online and partly in person, and we'll have an intensive for that coming up later. But the beginning, the doorway to it all is a permaculture design course. And while we do have some wonderful PDCs online, there's just nothing like being able to do it in person. It's a wonderful experience.
absolutely life-changing experience. Yeah. And where that social container has developed the community and a way of reciprocal relationship with each other in the land, while we learn the tools and the strategies and the techniques to heal landscape. It's just an amazing container, life-changing experience. And experiencing some of the kinds of things like your discussion about El Salvador. And I wanted to bring one other experience I had recently about working the land with a community. And that was helping out at the Cultural Conservancy. The Cultural Conservancy is an indigenous-led organization in this Bay Area, Northern California Bay Area. And they have a 7-acre, 8-acre bioheritage farm just down the road from me called what used to be called Heron Shadow. Now, I don't know the indigenous names for it at the moment. So it's a collective of indigenous folks growing food in community to feed the indigenous communities in this area. And I was helping out with an irrigation system there, and just doing some work, some volunteerism there. And I spent about a month there, about 4 days a week for about a month, working. And, like how you were describing that experience in El Salvador, Star, it's like that every day over at the Culture Conservancy farm. It's not about get out there and work, get it done as fast as possible. It's not a culture. The community, the approach to land stewardship at that Cultural Conservancy farm is not a culture of work hard to achieve things. It's a process of connection. So we'll be sitting there doing work and engage in conversation about, a little fossilized oyster, clamshell that came up in a trench. And then 15 minutes of wonderment about this and looking at the soil and sitting and chatting. And then a red-tailed hawk flies over and everybody just stops and talks to the hawk and takes the time. And I come from a work culture, in the trades, landscape contracting, where we're in a culture of you never stop working. You never stop moving. You're always moving from place to place. You're always getting something done. You're being as efficient as possible, and you get the job done efficiently and quickly. That's the kind of work culture I come from. And being with this community on the land was such a breath of fresh air to not feel the pressures of trying to complete a project, but that the process of connection was more important than what got done that day. And of course, all the work gets done anyway. So that really opened my eyes to how we could do things differently and not come from that workaholic culture approach.
Mm-hmm. I'll also say, like out here, I'm also in Sonoma County, a little further out in the wilds than Eric is, but we've developed this culture over the past few years where people come out and volunteer on weekends, and we do work on the forest and on the roads, around fire safety, thinning and limbing up and pruning and all the stuff you need to do to help create shaded fuel breaks and make our access routes safer. And that has created a wonderful sense of community, because people get together and everyone does what they're capable of doing. You know, you got like the young dudes with the chainsaws who are gung-ho out there, you know, cutting the trees, and other people pulling the brush, and other people who are maybe cutting smaller stuff or doing what they can do. And then we all have a lunch together. And it's built so many relationships, especially during the time of COVID when there wasn't a lot of other social activities happening and we could do it and be outdoors. And I think there's so much need for work on the land, and it's so satisfying when you do it, that it's a great opportunity right now in terms of just in general community organizing and bringing people together, to find the things that people are really excited about. And I guess in answer to that question, how do you get people involved? Fear, right? Fear of wildfires really got people involved out here. You know, the emergency and the urgency. And they say it's easier to organize people around community defense than around community transformation. So sometimes just emergency response, especially in these times, can be a good way of starting to bring people together and build some of those alliances.
And I want to add one more, and I know we're getting about time to wrap up, that the flip side of that is that there are emerging regenerative economies right now that are really, really relevant, very robust, very tangible career paths for folks. And the reason why I called my book The Regenerative Landscaper is because, you know, you hear a lot of folks in regenerative agriculture, getting out there, we're doing farms and things like that, which is absolutely relevant and notable and has to happen. But right here in the United States are 40 million acres of lawn, 40 million acres of lawn in the United States that are using over 200,000 trillion gallons of water per year, literally every year. So we're talking about a massive, massive land use problem that can be directly remedied through regenerative landscaping. And so the beautiful aspect of this concept of landscaping, the idea of, like, some of you might think, well, I'm not a landscaper, I'm a gardener, I'm a farmer. I mean, just the words are semantics, you know, like I design farms. I do stewardship plans for hundreds of acres of pasture and forest, you know, but I have a landscape contractor's license. So there's a particular legitimacy to creating a company and calling it a landscape company and doing landscape design. And you can develop very, very wonderful right livelihood pathways this way. Yeah. And one of the ways that we engage in volunteerism, and I tell this to all my students who are developing, because I teach people how to build their own regenerative landscape programs, their own regenerative landscape companies. One of the ways that you get noticed in your community and develop a clientele is by volunteering. So you build a company, and then you go volunteer your services to the community, to schools, to nonprofit organizations, to, you know, people who need it, jails and things like that. And you start to build social capital in the community, and your landscape company benefits from that. And you don't ever stop being of service to the community, because that's value, that's reciprocity, that's at the heart of what we do. But alongside that, now you have a right livelihood, and now you can get yourself out of debt, and you pay all your health insurance and take care of yourself and raise families and all these kinds of things. And if we don't get that part right, then we're not really going to be able to, you know, transform 40 million acres of lawn in the United States that are guzzling 200,000 trillion gallons of water, because there won't be any money to do that. You know, so we could transform an entire industry if it was $120 billion industry in the United States in 2020, the landscape industry. $120 billion industry. We could transform that. It would have an absolutely massive, colossal impact on land use, on carbon in the atmosphere, on water management, on biodiversity, on community health, on family health, because you're growing food. It's like it all can happen in what we call a landscape. We might think of it as a garden or a farm. So this is a path that is really easy to get into, like really easy. And you can really take care of yourself and your family this way.
Yeah, I did see a question went by there earlier about whether this applied to small gardens and lawns and things. And yes.
100%. Yeah.
And it's also true. I mean, with the forestry stuff that we've been doing, people have volunteered and gained some skills and then gotten hired because there's some companies around now that are doing the work, and there is money available and grants available. And there's also a wonderful organization out here that's been working on getting the grants and getting the money, because in the end, there's a scale it's got to be done at that takes more than the volunteers. And it really takes both. But I think I know you've done a lot with your company of providing jobs for people and livelihoods for people and doing it in a social justice way for some of the groups that ordinarily get stuck with the worst jobs and the worst pay, and been able to give them really good livelihoods. And
because when we talk about regeneration and we talk about this, and Mariah, number 3, 4, I see your hand. We're going to get to you here in a second. The process of regeneration isn't, like we've said, it's physical and it's social, and we want to avoid being the privileged folks who can volunteer our time and who are, fairly stable, and then we can do regeneration as a hobby and things like that. It's like, what about working people who are literally working 7 days a week? They'll never not work 7 days a week because they're providing for multiple families across different countries. That's how some work cultures are in the United States. And they could be putting in vineyards and spraying chemicals and getting paid minimum wage, or we can be developing regenerative economies where working folk can be planting trees and catching water and healing soil and having dignified work environment, be part of a community and feel like they can, to tend the earth. I have a lot of guys who have worked for me who went on and started their own companies and are thriving, and they're taking care of their families here, taking care of their families in Mexico, and they are leaders in the field of regenerative design, leaders. So I always, a while back, I got a little bit like, God, volunteering and this and that is just kind of can be so privileged to do that. And how do we scale regeneration up if it's a hobby, right? Like that doesn't make sense. All right, Douglas, you're on.
Hello. There's a issue that's happening here. I live in a rural area, just moved sort of outside a growing, continually gentrifying town. And the thing is like people are really worried about bears, and people are like they're afraid to grow food and cutting fruit trees down. And do you have anything to say in regards to that?
Yeah, that's definitely challenging. I mean, knowing how to live with bears is an honorable reciprocal thing to be done. I get it. So I get where you're coming from. I mean, I think that that's I have a lot of thoughts coming through. I've got a lot of rats where I live, and every time I have to hire people to come to deal with the rats, they're always like, well, you've got all these fruit trees, too many fruit trees, you're feeding the rats. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna pull my hair that I don't have off my head because I grow food. Yeah. And sure, it attracts rats. Yes, that's true. Now we work to manage rats. We don't cut the fruit trees down because of the benefit that it gives. One thought that's coming up for me, Douglas, is thinking about like if it's an old rural community, then likely there's an old there might be one of those old settler type of vibes out there, homesteads, old homesteads. It's like, how did people do it back, 100 years ago? Did they not plant fruit trees? I mean, the old way of doing it is a great way to point to in communities like yours.
I've got a
Yeah.
suggestion for you, both of your problems. Dogs.
Well, that's what I have on my personal property. Now I've just moved out a little bit further. But the town that I just left and came out a bit further, like the people that are coming there now are coming right from the city. And the old timers, they just lived with bears or they had dogs or sometimes they shot the bears. But people like just the people that are coming now, and I'm thinking about your landscape business and landscapers, I know they would be great to do there to grow food instead of lawns. But the people that are coming there now are just like, they're just so afraid of bears and so it's just food for thought to work that and make it work for everyone.
Yeah.
We're raising livestock guardian dogs, and it's made an enormous difference for us with all kinds of predators, and we raise a particular breed called Caracachans that are very people friendly, unlike many of the livestock guardian dogs. But we have some of them trained to guard our poultry now, and I think a good big dog can provide a lot of benefits, including keeping away the bears. And we also have a couple of rat terriers that we're training to deal with the rat problem, so that you can get a good rat terrier to come to your place and they'll take out the rats. And
yeah, I've seen that. I know they've got the mongrel horde, right? They've got a guy here who has his mongrel horde of rat terriers that comes in and deals with the rats. Well, in our place, we've created such a biodiverse ecological community that the fox moved in, and the fox were here for about 7 months, and they totally eradicated the rats and gopher. And it's because we developed such a trophic cycle of life and death that we were able to bring that level of diversity in. And so, like you said with the bears, Douglas, we got to learn how to cohabitate with bears. We just have to if we want to bring them back. And someone's offering, electric fencing. I feel like bears are kind of like the way we would think about gophers. There's no one way. It's a multitude of different ways and approaches. And maybe not having a fruit tree up against the house, maybe a little farther away, so you're not inviting the bear like right into your zone one. Maybe there's some design approaches that would create cohabitation, as well as keeping them out, as well as having the dogs to deter. 3, 4, 5 different ways to approach that might be one factor. But obviously, keeping garbage locked up is kind of like the number one thing that you do before you move on to those other parts. So I think that we are, Charles, what's our time like? Are we have time for another couple questions in the conversation, or where are we at?
We don't have any hard deadline, but yeah, it's kind of up to you two.
Okay.
I'd like to help the woman who asked for help with budget. So I had just handed in my budget to start my music production company and my ongoing series called Concerts for the Trees. My father, the philanthropist, taught me to do a budget when I first went to college. I needed some, so I'm real familiar with budgets, with how to focus on the exact amounts of money for exactly what you need to then tell God, I need this much money because I'm going to do this with it. And then you focus on attracting I'm successful now in ways that I never thought I had to be. I thought I was just going to be an artist, but I
That's
have to rate.
wonderful,
So
Gloria.
I'd like to help you, and I'd like to give my phone number. I don't type in chats. I'm live. It's 707 827 8353. L'Oreal Goldenhawk.
All right. Thank you, Gloria.
707 827 8353. And if there are any artists or anyone that wants to participate in the ongoing series, concerts.
Thank you so much, L'Oreal. I'll also say that we do have a regenerative business design course online in EAT that will be coming up. I believe we've got a session coming up this spring. And that's also a wonderful place you can learn to create a budget and a business plan and, a strategy for developing a business and running it and doing all those pieces of it that can make it actually work, which is important.
Yeah, exactly. And which is why, going through so I think just as a way to bring us to where we can open the circle and go back into our lands, our communities, our homes, our spaces with what we've taken here. Just to say that to do this work, in my view, it's important to have, one foot in the sacred reciprocal relationship with all of life, and another root in the really tangible skills of organizing things, whether it's budgets, time, people, conversations, community and cultural context. Like, we can't just do one or the other. And then but the root of all of that is being able to just listen.
Yeah.
Just to be able to take time to listen. I don't want that to get lost in all of our solutions, because ultimately ecosystems are changing rapidly, cultures changing, economies are changing. Things are, they say that in terms of the climate by 2080, it will be in vastly different climates as the warm climate moves north. Where I'm standing supposedly is going to be like Santa Barbara. So the more that we can be in a place of listening and participating, not controlling, not imposing, but participating in this unfolding dance of life as we all find our way, watersheds and forests and pastures and humans and migrating animals, as we all find our way into this new world that is evolving. That if we can do that in participation and in love and with reciprocity at the center, then that's the process. I think we'll see where we go.
Thank you, Eric. That is really inspiring. And I want to say thank you to all of you. I want to acknowledge we've had someone on here from Kerala in India. I see Fred Mugisha from the Peace Foundation in East Africa. I know we've had Seth Jonadov, who's one of our students from Uganda. And we've been working to help their community raise money for water tanks and to develop permaculture infrastructure. A very unique community of Ugandan Jews that is a really, really wonderful addition. Part of what we do in Earth Activist Training is to offer diversity scholarships for people of color and Indigenous folks from around the world. And that's part of our way of making reparations. We do a lot of fundraising so that we can afford to do that. We have a silent auction going on right now. And I think Charles posted a link to, and we'll be sending you all out an invitation to contribute to our holiday fundraising for scholarships. We have, I think, 4 that we've been able to give for our upcoming permaculture design course, but we still have additional students asking for scholarships, and we really like to be able to do that because it helps get these skills in the hands of the people who are on the front lines of so many of the environmental and social justice struggles. Also in the spring, we'll be doing a special online course on permaculture solutions to climate change. And next week, Charles and I are going to do a little Instagram discussion. When did we say we were going to do it? Friday morning. I think we said 10 a.m., right? On permaculture solutions and approaches to climate change. So we'll invite you all to be part of that as well. And I want to say thank you to the ancestors and to spirit, to earth and water and fire and air, those amazing elements that sustain our lives. And thank you to Charles for doing the tech hosting and so much of the behind the scenes work that makes this possible. Thank you to Mariah Master for helping to organize this and being our student coordinator and showing up in so many different guises tonight. And Elizabeth and all the rest of the EAT team. We have a great team of people working with us so that we can create these programs and really help spread these skills of regeneration around because they're so needed right now. And with that, I think our circle is open, but unbroken. May peace and regeneration and just lots of good luck and energy go with you. We always like to say merry meet and merry part and merry meet again.
Thank you, Star.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone.
And if you had a question, didn't get it answered, I apologize, but we invite you to contact us and you can send it to us and we'll do our best to help get you the information that you need. Do you have some music to play us out with, Charles?
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Stay connected. Hope to stay connected with you all. Please reach out.